Good. So a Scrum Master, a software developer, and their boss were walking to work one morning. And much to their surprise, as they were walking, they looked down and they saw something that looked suspiciously like one of those genie's lamps, you know, out of the movie Aladdin, right? And so they figured, well, this is a little bit silly, but we've got to give it a try. So the software developer picked up the lamp, and he gave a little shrug, and he gave a little rub to the side of the lamp. And lo and behold, out popped a real genie. And the genie looked at the software developer, the Scrum Master, and their boss, and he said, "Today is your lucky day. I'm going to grant each of you one wish. Whatever your heart desires, it will be yours." And the software developer rubbed his hands together and said, "This is amazing because the code has so much spaghetti code in it. There's a lot of technical architecture I don't like, and it's just a pain to work with all of my teammates. So, Genie, here's what I want from you. I want you to transport me to Hawaii right now. And I want it to be nice and warm, with the sun beating down on me, with a drink in my hand, on a lounge chair on the beach, and not a care in the world." And the genie says, "Okay, your wish is my command," and poof, off goes the software developer. And the Scrum Master and the boss say, "Whoa, this isn't just a genie that came out of the lamp. This is real. I'm excited." So the Scrum Master says, "I want to go next. I want to go next." And the genie says, "Great, Scrum Master, what do you want?" And the Scrum Master says, "You know, it's frustrating being a servant leader. I'm trying to get my team to adopt Scrum, and they don't quite understand. I don't know how to judge my productivity, and this just might not be the right job for me. So, Genie, I want you to transport me, not to Hawaii, because I don't want to be anywhere near that guy. I want you to transport me to the Bahamas. It's going to be warm there too, but I want to be snorkeling in crystal clear water with tropical fish all around." And the genie says, "Okay, your wish is my command," and poof, off goes the Scrum Master. And so the genie looks at the boss and says, "Boss, it's your turn. What do you want?" And the genie thinks for a minute, says, "You know, what I'd really like," and the genie says, "What's that, boss?" And he says, "I want the software developer and Scrum Master back here by lunch." Hi, everybody. My name is David Horowitz. I am the co-founder and CEO at a company called Retrium. We have a software platform to help you run better retrospectives. Any Retrium users here, by any chance? A handful? Cool. Awesome. In addition to my day job as the CEO of Retrium, which is in the middle there, I also have the wonderful opportunity over the past year or so to be co-authoring the second edition of the book on Agile Retrospectives called Agile Retrospectives. Making Good Teams Great. I'm co-authoring that book with Diana Larson and Esther Derby. Has anyone heard of them before? They're kind of luminaries in our space. If you want to know anything about retrospectives, you should stop listening to me and please go buy that book. Thank you very much. It's been fun. No, I'm kidding. Okay. The second edition of the book comes out in January. We are very close to being done, and there's a lot of new content in there I'm very excited about. So really, my life revolves around retrospectives, but not because of the book, and not because of the company, but rather because of that third row there. I'm also the dad of 4 little kids, aged 11, 9, 6, and 4. And you better believe my wife and I run retrospectives at home on how to be better parents, because that is hard. So this is my life. And this is actually my second time here in Montreal this year. The first time was with my kids this summer, and I'm really excited to be back with you today. So that's enough about me. I want to learn a little bit about you before I jump into the talk. So I'm going to ask you a simple question. This talk will be a success if I learn something about. And what I want to do is give you 3 minutes, and I'm going to limit it to 3 minutes, to turn to your dear friends who are close to you to talk about this question. And when we stop after 3 minutes, we're going to go around the room really quickly. I'm going to ask for 1 to 3 word responses per group about what you're looking for from this talk, because I've given this 50 times, and I can easily change the talk based on what you tell me. Okay? So turn to your neighbors, 5 to 7 of you, self-organize, and then we'll go around the room. Your turn. Go ahead.
Oui, ben dans cette équipe-là, oui, c'est principalement agile.
You have about 1 minute left. 1 minute. Okay, everybody, time's up. Everybody, turn your attention back to me, please. Thank you. Okay, I don't know your name, I'm sorry, but okay, he's going to hand the mic to whichever group wants to go first. And remember, 1 to 3 words. We're not talking about a long soliloquy about what's going wrong with your retrospectives. 1 to 3 words. Go ahead, raise your hand. Yeah.
I can start. Hi, everyone. So I think it will be more best practice for the retrospective. And
so retro best practices. Great. Next group.
So how to bring positivity out of what is talked about in the retrospective.
Yeah.
And
okay.
to put impact of what is said also.
Good. So positivity and impact. Great. Keep going.
Action plans.
Action plans.
Action on the action plans.
And action on the action plans. Wonderful. Okay, yes.
Stop blaming the universe.
Stop blaming the universe. Nice. I like it. Okay.
How to maximize the value of the retro.
Okay, how to maximize the value. Closely related to how to actually act on the actions, maybe. Okay, let's keep going.
Yeah. Actionable items. And
actionable items, great.
Participation.
Participation, okay. Let's keep going.
Real improvement.
Real improvement, again, similar. Good, we have a theme.
Efficient session and actions.
Efficiency and actions, okay. Keep going.
Getting people to want to be part of the retrospective.
Ah, getting them to want to be there, great, okay. Keep going.
Facilitation tips.
Facilitation tips, wonderful.
Getting answers to deeper problems.
Okay, diving deeper than the surface level issues, good.
Let's talk about the last quarter and not just the last week in our retros.
Okay, talk about a longer time period. What else?
Get valuable outcomes.
Valuable outcomes.
How to go deeper in the problematics.
Deeper, okay, so there's a theme here again, good.
Fresh ideas.
Fresh ideas, okay.
How to create a safe space.
Safety, yeah, psychological safety, great.
different perspective on retrospectives.
A different perspective, okay. Good.
Why not adding higher management into our retrospective meetings?
Okay, whether to include management, higher level management in the retros, good.
Taking actions on our actions item.
Okay, again, the actions, good.
What to talk about when things go generally well in the project.
Ah, okay, maybe related to positivity, good. Let's keep going.
Making retros interesting and especially remotely.
Okay, making them interesting remotely, good.
Maybe scale.
Yeah, okay, good.
New idea on retro.
Okay, new ideas.
Embrace participation.
Yep, okay, participation, good.
Make it more interesting.
More interesting, yeah. Maybe related to participation, yeah, okay.
Improve and bring positivity.
Okay, improvement and positivity, good.
How to deal with problems that are outside the team, not in the team.
Good one, okay. Also related to action on the action, but outside the team, good.
Action plan and engagement.
Okay, action and engagement.
Important insights.
Insights, good.
Fix problems and action plan.
Fix problems and action plans, okay.
How to retro for the people outside the developers.
Ah, retros other than just development. Okay, great.
I think we all talked.
Yes, wonderful. Okay, give you all a round of applause. Thank you, everybody. It's very helpful to me. Like I said, I've given this talk many, many times, but it's amazing how frequently a couple of themes come up. One is action after the retro's over. Two is participation or engagement, and the third is psychological safety. So those three were definitely mentioned here, among other issues. We're going to touch on as many of these as I possibly can today, and then I'll reserve time and Q&A both throughout the session and at the end. So let's dive in. I'm going to start with the basics, just to make sure we're on the same page. I firmly believe, and this is why I started a company and I'm writing a book on this topic, that retrospectives are the true catalyst of agility. Why? Agile, if I were to define it in just 2 words, would be continuous improvement. That's it. Everything else is how do we get to continuous improvement. If you knew nothing about Agile, absolutely nothing, other than you were an expert facilitator of retrospectives, my hypothesis is that you would be able to use the retrospective to discover everything we know about Agile, right? So limiting work in progress, you could discover that. Cross-functional teams, you could discover that. Prioritize backlogs, you could discover that, and so on. So the retrospectives really are this vehicle for learning, but only if you run a good one. And from the sounds of the problems in the room, there's a lot of issues that people are facing when they're running retros. That's kind of why we're here today. Retrospectives are an opportunity for your team to reflect on what has occurred and to construct ways to become better going forward. Everyone's on the same page about the basics. Any questions here before I dive into other topics? Okay, great. The core problem with retrospectives is as follows. It's something I call the vicious cycle of retrospective disillusionment. It goes like this. We all show up for a retrospective, and we're maybe happy to be there, maybe we're neutral on being there, but we are relatively engaged. We go through the retrospective process, and at the end we come up with 1 or more actions. Maybe we go home for the weekend because it was a Friday. We come back Monday morning, and all of a sudden we have work to do. Our boss is giving us things that aren't even in the sprint backlog to work on. We get distracted by the bugs that are popping up in our system, and before we know it, maybe the 2-week iteration has gone by, and it's time for the next retrospective, and oops, we forgot completely about the actions that we were supposed to work on, like your point here when you raised it before, acting on the actions, right? It's difficult. Now, the logical response, or a logical response to that would be less engagement in the next retrospective. Because if the first time when you ran it, it didn't work out for you, well, why do I want to pay attention the second time, right? In fact, one of the core principles of Agile is the removal of waste. So if the retrospective isn't working for you, why would I want to show up the next time? And the problem is if I'm less engaged the next time, then I'm less likely to work on the action items again in the next sprint, and so on and so forth down this cycle of disillusionment until you get to the point where nobody wants to show up, it's a checklist item and nobody cares, and we end up skipping them or running them irregularly. Does this sound familiar? Oh, nervous laughter. Oh, that's my team. Yes, right? We've all been in this boat. I've been in this boat before. Everyone's been here because retrospectives are very difficult. The point of this talk is to help you, help all of us, get out of this cycle of disillusionment and back into a place where retrospectives are truly driving learning and growth for your team. Cool? That's why we're here, right? Okay. Retrospectives rely on 3 pillars. The first pillar is people. You have to get the right people in the room. Simple. Or not, maybe. The second is process, or what some of us call facilitation, which is once the right people are in the room, we have to facilitate the retrospective to have a meaningful conversation, right? And then the last pillar that retrospectives rely on is follow-through, or acting on the actions, which is if we have the right people in the room, and we follow the most amazing, engaging retrospective facilitation process ever designed, but we don't do anything about what we learned, then was it actually helpful? Maybe, but not as helpful as it could have been. What makes retros particularly difficult is that just like a table with 3 legs, if any one of these, take a saw to it, knock it off, table falls over, same thing here, right? Just imagine for a second if you, let's say, don't use a well-facilitated process, but you have the right people in the room. Likely the most important issues won't surface. The extroverts will probably dominate the conversation. And so the retro won't be as effective as it could have been. We know what would happen if follow-through doesn't occur, right? It's largely a waste of time. You fall into the cycle of disillusionment, and so on. You have to get all 3 of these right, every single retrospective. The structure of the rest of this talk is I'm going to go through each one of these, giving you tips and tricks on how to make sure you get them right. Everyone's on the same page? We're good? Any questions? Okay, excellent. Let's jump in. First, we're going to talk about people. Rule number 1 about people is that retrospectives are for the team. Seems pretty basic. I mean, the team is not your boss, it's not your stakeholders, it's not your agile coach, it's the team. So who's on the team? Can you speak louder just so everyone can hear? Yeah. Yeah. Developer, PO, and and Scrum Master, great. And we know that from the Scrum Guide. This is an actual quote, right? You can bow down to our overlords here. Right? Scrum, thank you, thank you. All right, Sprint Retro is an opportunity for the Scrum team to inspect itself, Scrum team, notice, and create a plan for improvements to be enacted during the next sprint. Okay, so like you said, Scrum Master, Product Owner, Development Team. Great. Or is it? So rule number 2 that I want to share with you is completely ignore everything I just said. Rule number 1, ignore it. Why do I say that? Because we're all smart individuals. We should, in fact, use our brains to figure out who we should invite and not just bow down to our Scrum overlords. Sometimes it's incredibly helpful to invite your boss, for example, to the retrospective. It minimizes the communication loops we have to jump through in order to get the message across. But the key point here, and this is what I really want to make sure everyone understands, is that it has to be an opt-in invitation from the team, not the boss saying, well, guess what, today, gang, I'm going to show up at your retro. I want to make sure you're on track, right? That is an anti-pattern. It's up to the team to invite whoever is most effective for the context that they are in. So use your brain. But by default, the 80% rule is it's just for product owner, Scrum Master, and development team. Yeah. So the Yeah, so I'll just repeat what you mentioned. So she said, what's your name? Victoria has mentioned that sometimes she's experienced the boss saying, I'm offended because you're not including me in your retrospective. I'm on the team, right? No, but how do you respond to that is the real question I think that you're getting at. So here's what you shouldn't say, just be clear. So, what you're telling me is that I think I'll show up to the next board meeting because I'm on your team. And, it'd be great if we're just going to be able to communicate transparently, right, boss? Don't say that, but that's in effect what the boss is saying to you, that we believe in transparency here. We're all together on this one mission, so why can't we all be in each other's meetings? You probably can take that message and translate it into a nicer way of saying it to make sure that the individual understands that actually the psychological safety of the people in that room matters a lot. If they don't feel safe saying what's on their mind, you're not going to have a successful retrospective. And sometimes, because of power dynamics, having a boss in the room limits what people will share openly. So that would be the argument as to why they can't be there. Now, how you message that to your boss depends on your relationship with them, depends on a lot of context in the organization. But yeah, said no, good, say no. Okay, great. Rule 3 for you as facilitators is to pick one of these things. Facilitate or participate, but not both. So here's what I mean. When you are a Scrum Master or an Agile coach, you go to a retrospective and your job is to facilitate. It's really hard to both manage the facilitation process in the retrospective and also be a valuable contributor at the same time. In fact, one of the most well-known Agile experts in the world once told me, and I think this is a direct quote, "I have no idea how to do both of these at the same time," end quote. Meaning, if that person couldn't do it, probably none of us could either. It's really hard. And the reason there is because the facilitator is responsible for the how of the conversation, and the participants are responsible for the what of the conversation. The how is really, really critical to get the retrospective right. And if you're focused on the argument of the what, you're going to lose sight of how to do the how correctly. It's not easy to balance both. Now, I recognize that this is a bit of an ivory tower view, because if you're a Scrum Master on the team, you probably have really interesting things to contribute to the conversation. So far be it from me to suggest don't contribute them. How do we do that successfully? I bring a hat, an actual hat, to my meetings. And the hat says facilitator on it. And throughout the entire meeting, I wear my facilitator hat. But the moment that I have something I need to contribute back to the team, I take off that hat to give a visual indication to the team I'm not in facilitator mode anymore. I'm going to be biased right now. I'm no longer a neutral facilitator. I'm part of the team, and I'm going to try to argue my point of view. But because I don't have my hat on, people know that's the stance that I'm taking in the meeting. That doesn't have to be a hat. You can use any physical item to visually represent. That's the state you're in. But make it clear if you're facilitating or participating in any given meeting. Okay, rule number 4 is if one person is remote, everybody is remote. Now, before COVID, this usually threw people for a loop. They said, wow, that's crazy. After COVID, it's a little bit easier to understand because we've all been the person calling into a meeting and suffering from how difficult that can be, right? So let me ask you a question. Suppose this is your team makeup. Who here is the remote team member? The black one. Anyone have a different opinion? Yeah, in the back? They're all remote. Why do you say they're all remote? Yeah, right? It depends. So I hear you that the black person there is the remote one, but also from the black little Lego guy's perspective, the red ones are remote from them. The whole team's remote, which is why if one person is remote, everyone is remote. The problem with not treating the team as remote in this situation is that it is an unequal playing field for the conversation. If you've ever been the one off over there on the right side of the screen, you know how difficult it can be to get your voice to be heard in the meeting. So if you level the playing field, what that means practically is don't just rely on conference calls alone. Do something to recreate the sticky note environment you'd have if you were in person, but online. Now, I'm not here to tell you you should use this tool or another. I'm here to give you a landscape of how to think it through. On the left-hand side of this diagram are general purpose collaboration tools, like the Miros of the world, the Google Docs of the world. These you can do almost anything with, right? And they're great for retrospectives if you know how to design a good retrospective experience in those platforms. On the right-hand side of this diagram are purpose-built tools for retrospectives that will guide you through the retrospective process. They're great if you don't have the time or know-how to design these experiences in the Miros of the world. So pick your tool based on your need and your experience, but don't let the tool dictate the process that you're running. The key thing here is to use something. Don't just have a conference call. Questions about that? Okay, so to recap, rule number 1, retrospectives are for the team. Rule number 2 is to ignore everything about rule number 1, use your brain. Rule 3 is facilitate or participate, pick one. And rule 4 is level the playing field. Make sure that if one person is remote, everyone has access to the same systems to utilize. I'm going to pause and ask, are there any questions about anything I just said before I keep going? Cool. That either means everyone is completely confused or everyone's on the same page. I'm hoping for the latter. If you're confused, please just raise your hand, ask a question. I'm happy to answer. Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Does that mean that if you have people in the office and a few people in remote, everybody should be just remote, removing the nonverbal cues and everything else for everybody?
Yep. It's a good question. So just to repeat your question, Victoria, right? No, that's Victoria. You are Isabel. Did I ask you your name before? Okay, that's why I didn't know it. Okay, I took a guess. It was wrong. Okay. Everyone here is Victoria. Congratulations. Isabel here said that if one person's remote, should we just all dial in to make sure that everyone's using the same conference call system, or should we have some people be kind of physically co-located, right? As Agile coaches tend to say, and I'm not one, it depends, right? It depends. But as much as you all hate that answer, I hate that answer too. I can only tell you in my experience what works for me, which is that you should at least try to have everyone dial in on a conference call and see what the reaction is. There's going to be some positives, which are now everyone has the same advantages and disadvantages. At least we can talk about those together as a team. There's no haves and have-nots. That's a good thing. And there's going to be some disadvantages, connection issues, bandwidth issues, all of the things we've come to know and love over the past few years. Try it and see what happens. My bias is it's better to level the playing field than it is to not, but that's what's worked for the teams I've worked with, not necessarily yours. Yeah. Anything else before I move on? Okay. Remember our three-legged stool that I talked about? That was the people section. Let's move on to process or facilitation. And I'm going to have the same set of rules. Rule number 1, use facilitation techniques. Okay, sounds simple, right? Let me give you an example of why. Let's run a retrospective on this conference right now. Yeah, okay, you get the point. I'm not facilitating. No one knows what to do. This is an extreme, but it gets my point across. Facilitation matters a lot. Otherwise, there's a loss of direction and vision of what we're trying to accomplish in the room, in the meeting. So let's try to improve what I just did, just marginally. One thing I'd change about this conference is, so maybe 1 or 2 people, just say something. The noise next door. What else? How to get the name of? Of the people in the room. Yeah, okay, good. It's not all Victoria. Okay, one more, yeah. A microphone, yeah, great. Okay, so now you see, just with a very simple amount of facilitation, all of a sudden there's participation. So how do we do it the right way? Who here has seen this diagram before? Handful of people. That warms my heart. This comes from the first edition of the book I referred to at the beginning of the talk, Agile Retrospectives, Making Good Teams Great. I'm going to spend some amount of time here because you know how people say when they're on stage, if there's one thing you should take away from this talk, it's this one, right? Guess what? If there's one thing you want to take, it's this one. Okay. On the right-hand side of the figure 8 is the retrospective. On the left-hand side of the figure 8 is the iteration or the sprint that we're in. The overarching message here is that the sprint leads insights into the retrospective, and insights into the retrospective leads back into the sprint. Okay, that's at the high line what we're talking about. But to break down the right-hand side of the diagram, since the talk is about retros, there are 5 stages to an effective retrospective. Okay? The first one is set the stage. The second one is gather data. The third one is generate insights. The fourth one is decide what to do. And the fifth one is close the retro. I'm going to go through each one of those briefly to make sure you understand why this is so important and a little bit about how to do it. So set the stage. When you set the stage, you're inviting participation at the beginning of the retrospective. The simplest way to do that is just to have everyone go around the room and say, in one word, how are you feeling right now in this moment? And you'll get people who say enthusiastic, excited. You'll get people who say, I feel like a prisoner being here, I don't want to be here. You'll get people say frustrated. But whatever it is, you now have a sense of the emotional state of the room. And the more experienced you get as a facilitator, the more you'll be able to adapt your approach based on what you just heard. That's advantage number 1. Advantage number 2 is that there's research out there that shows that if someone participates just once, meaning they speak up verbally just once in a meeting, it is more likely that they will speak up again. There's research about this. So, given that that's the case, if you ask people to just say one word at the beginning of the retro, it is much more likely that you'll get participation from them going forward. Simple little trick, okay? So that's set the stage. There's hundreds of ways of setting the stage. That's just the simple one. Phase 2 is gather data. So, gather data is, let's just talk about the facts. What actually is happening in our room right now, or over the past 2 weeks, or past month, or whatever our iteration that we're retrospecting on. We want to gather data. Here's why that's so important. If you asked me, name every single dinner that I ate over the past 2 weeks. Okay, last night I think I'd remember, but even 2 nights ago, I'm not sure I'd remember, right? And I bet you, if you asked the 6 people in my family name all of those dinners, you'd get wildly different answers, because people remember different dinners. Trivial, silly example, but the same thing is true on your team. If you don't gather data about just what happened before you jump into what should we do going forward, then everyone has different mental models about the facts. And it's really hard to have a productive conversation about the facts when you don't share the set of facts. Sounds a little bit like the world we live in right now, maybe, unfortunately. So, gather data. Here's an example of how you might do it. You can gather hard data, meaning actual data that is verifiable and true, by pulling it out of your system of record. Maybe that's GitHub, maybe that's Jira, and you bring it to the retrospective. It could be the number of bugs introduced to the system over the past 2 weeks. It could be your burn down chart. This is just hard factual data. There's no argument about it. It just is. Or you could gather subjective data in the retrospective by, for example, hanging a timeline chart and asking people to fill in, what do you remember happening, both the things that happened and your emotional state about those things across time, where x-axis is the time. And you fill in this map. It takes 10 minutes or so. And now you have this wonderful visualization of the facts. And you'd be surprised how easy people just naturally fall into conversation about the facts. There's debate. Oh, I don't remember that. I remember that differently. I was happy when that happened and you were sad. I wonder why. And all of a sudden, as a facilitator, your job's easy. You can kind of step back and let it happen. Data, bringing data is really, really powerful, and too many teams skip it. Okay, the third phase of the retrospective is generating insights. Now that we have data to discuss, let's figure out something new about it. Let's learn. Really simple way of doing that is something called 5 whys. Have you heard of 5 whys before? Yes, lots of head nods. Great. 5 whys is a simple way of digging deeper below the surface of why actually did this happen. Since I got a lot of head nods, I'm going to skip how to do it. Look it up if you don't know it. It helps you get below the surface issues. So that's generate insights. Then you move to decide what to do. So now we have some learning, something that we found that we didn't know before. Now the question is, what do we do about it? And that's where coming up with an action item comes from. Simple way to do that, SMART action item. People have heard of SMART action items? Yes? What does it stand for? I always forget. S? Succinct. M? Measurable. A? Actionable. R? Realistic. And T? Time-bound. Great, thank you. Okay, that makes my life easier. So SMART, great little way of writing down an action item in a somewhat more actionable way. Okay, finally, we go to close the retrospective. We've done this whole retrospective exercise, and a lot of teams would just leave at this point. But just like at this talk, I'm going to ask you at the end for feedback. A great way to close the retro as the facilitator is, again, ask for feedback. Because if it's not working for your team, there's your chance to improve. So that flow really matters. And the more you look into how to facilitate each of those phases and practice it, the better your retrospectives are going to get. Make sense? Questions about this in particular? Okay, great. Rule number 2 is to zoom in on the dog. Oh, I must have a note. Zoom in on the dog nose. Oh, I wonder. Okay, let's see what that means. Zoom in on the dog nose. Does anyone see this meme before? On the platform formerly known as Twitter. I don't know how long we have to say that for, but that seems to be what people refer to it as. Has anyone seen this before? It's a little bit old at this point. You've seen it? Great. So zoom in on the dog nose. Okay, let's zoom. Ready? Let's see what happens. Okay, getting a little bit closer. I don't know, still don't know exactly what. Okay, oh, there's his nose, and there's something there. It's blurry, but it says, look in the bottom left corner. Okay, all right, let's zoom to the next place. All right, bottom left corner, there's his paw. Oh, look in the top right corner. Okay, let's keep going. Oh, you are beautiful. Oh, this is why I give this talk. You know, it's so nice. Okay, we're zooming in on the dog nose. What am I getting at? Let me give you another example before describing it. We have some nice little fish swimming in the deep blue sea. What are their names again? It's not Nemo, though, right? It's Dory and I don't know what you're saying, but that. Marlin, Marvin, something. Marlin, right? It's not Nemo. Anyway, they're swimming in the deep blue sea, and everything's going kind of nice, except, oh, hello, there's a shark there. Where you look changes your perspective greatly in the retrospective. So here's practically what I mean by that. There's a facilitation technique called Team Radar. Has anyone heard of it before? A couple people, great. Here's how I love to use it more than any other way, although there's a lot of different use cases. It's a great way to gather data at the beginning of your retrospective to find a narrow focus for the conversation. Most retrospectives that I've seen go something like this. Hey, welcome everybody to the retrospective. I've set up a board with what went well and what didn't go well, and I'm going to give you 5 minutes to fill in the sticky notes, and then we'll have a conversation. Does that sound familiar? Okay, it's really hard to have a brainstorming process about such an unconstrained worldview. What went well and what didn't go? I don't know. However, if you pick a narrow focus to your retrospective, the constraint on what you are discussing opens up your ability to brainstorm more creatively. So here's how this works. If you look at this diagram, there are 6 different spokes. 6? Yes, 6 different spokes. You can name them whatever you want. In this case, we have tools and technology, collaboration, and so on. And you ask everyone, rate how you think the team is doing from 1 to 5 on each of those spokes. And then you just average the data, and you come up with some results. In this case, our processes and practices are rated the lowest, 1.8. So we could set a narrow focus just on our processes and practices on this team. Now, what did we do well and what did we not do well? We're rating it low, so there must be something interesting to learn there. Right? The narrow focus helps. Another way of interpreting this chart is the gray curves above each of the spokes. You don't have to be a statistician, I'm not, to understand it, but the gray curves are the normal distribution of the data on the spoke. All that means is, for one, like on processes and practices where it's kind of tall there and narrow, there's a lot of agreement. People agree it's rated poorly. And the ones that are flat and wide, that go out, like the rest of them, there's a lot of disagreement. Some people rated it a 5, some people rated it a 1. So in addition to looking at the average, you could choose to pick a topic where there's a lot of disagreement. That would be interesting to dive into. Either way, finding a narrow focus for your retrospective really helps boost participation, which I know is one of the core concerns that came out early on when I asked you all. Questions about this? Yeah.
Do you use the same subjects for a few retrospectives that follow, or do you change subjects? I mean, do you want to deep dive into those 6 points and say, I want to do 6 retrospectives on those?
So the question is, do you continuously keep using the same labels on the spokes radar, or do you change it? It's really up to you. So it depends. If you, at the end of a retrospective, at the end of the next sprint, you realize there's more to talk about there, you just use the same one. If that isn't leading to insights anymore, change it up. Now, other teams, particularly at large enterprises, they will have, for this quarter, we're going to run this team radar across all teams because we have a focus of improving technical debt this quarter, and that's coming down from the top. In which case, great, let's run a radar with all the different spokes having something to do with technical debt. And that's going to really help us improve across time. So it just depends on the team that you're on. One of the things that you have to do as a Scrum Master is understand the context of your team to set up the retrospective for success. One of those things is coming up with the right spokes here. Okay, let's keep going. Rule number 3, facilitate open... Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Because I've seen this radar before, but not using retrospective.
Yep.
It's like there were like a set of questions for each of these categories
Mm-hmm.
to see how agile was the team or how mature it was. How do you use it in retrospective? You just say, how do you feel about these categories in the last sprint, or you use it in different ways?
Yeah, so the question is you've seen these radars used in other contexts, but not in retrospectives, so how do you use it in a retro? There are lots of ways, but my favorite way of doing it is at the beginning of the retro, in the gather data stage, so after we've set the stage but we're gathering data, open up the radar and just ask people to rate from 1 to 5 the different spokes, and very quickly, within 60 seconds to 120 seconds, you have insights. You have something fascinating that you didn't know before, and it's data about how your team is doing. And from that, you can pick a focus for your retrospective to make the conversation blossom. Okay, rule number 3 is to facilitate open discussion or conversation. The main thing to know here is okay, I counted to 10. Whew, I can breathe again. Silence is your friend as a facilitator. It helps people take time to think, especially people who are on the more introverted side of the spectrum. Silence matters. When there's silence, don't shy away from it, embrace it, and that takes practice. But silence is your friend. The second thing about facilitating open conversation is create invitations. Don't force anything. So how many people here have been in a room where someone in a meeting says, you know, I haven't heard from you in a while. What would you like to say? Do you know how uncomfortable that is? If you don't have anything to say, you're put in the spotlight right then. So you want to create invitations instead. So as an example of this, do we have anyone named Joe or Sarah in the room right now? And I'm so sorry if we do. No? Okay. Who am I going to pick on today? Let's see. Okay, you're looking at me. That was a mistake. Stand on up. What's your name? Jeff. Oh, it's close to Joe. I almost got it right. Okay, this is Jeff. Thank you, Jeff. No. I'm kidding. Thank you. But see, this is how embarrassing or awkward this can get. There's nervous laughter, right? I'm not going to make him dance. But so instead of that, we could say, Jeff, I haven't heard from you in a while. Not good. Sorry, that's what you don't want to say. Instead, what you want to say is, who else has an idea? It's opening an invitation, right? Instead of picking on someone. Any comments from someone who hasn't spoken in a while is another good invitation. Are there any other perspectives on this? Another good invitation. These are all examples of powerful questions. Powerful questions are truly open. They are not asked with a correct answer in mind ahead of time. They invite introspection. They reveal additional solutions. They almost always lead to greater creativity and insight, and they send people into a realm of discovery. There's a great deck of example questions that I'm going to share with you once people are done taking a picture now. These are some more examples, but at the bottom here, and I think this deck will be available after, so you can take a look at that link, put out by the nice folks of Growing Agile in South Africa. They have a deck of, I think it's maybe 100 of these types of questions, which as a facilitator, have in your back pocket. They're very, very helpful to facilitate open conversation. I'm going to keep going in the interest of time. We'll share the deck around, so if you haven't gotten a photo, it's okay. All right, to recap, rule number 1 is use facilitation techniques. You remember what happened when I just stood there? No one knew what to do. Number 2 is zoom in on the dog nose. Pick a focus area when you're facilitating, and all of a sudden participation will blossom if you pick a focus that people care about. And rule 3 is to facilitate open conversation. No matter what facilitation techniques you use for each of the 5 stages, eventually there will just be open conversation. Facilitate it. Questions about this before I move on to the third leg of our stool? Yes?
Could you elaborate more on silence is your friend? Are you saying that you let the silence be and magically people will speak?
Yes, I am, actually. Yeah. When you don't know what to do next as a facilitator, the best thing you can do is to do nothing. Count to 10 in your head slowly, like 1, 2, and let the silence be. 9 times out of 10, and I don't think I'm exaggerating in my experience, 9 times out of 10, someone will say something, and your conversation will continue without you as a facilitator having to figure out what to do next. And the reason for that is introverts need time to think, right? And if you are constantly filling the silence with some instruction, they don't have time to process. This is not a bad thing. This is a great thing. Give them the time to think, right? And then they'll start participating. Yes? Yeah, what's wrong? A little brain dead or something. Yeah, sure. If you think there might be some awkward silence, it depends on the culture of your team, right? So for some teams, that would be funny, and that's great. For other teams, you might want to give them a warning. I'm going to introduce silence as a facilitation technique. The intent is, right? Yes? Yeah. Yeah. So the question here is, especially on remote teams, people are doing other things. They're multitasking. This is also true not just with remote teams, by the way. I've seen plenty of in-person meetings where people bring their laptops and are on it during the meeting. The best way to fix that is to pick a topic people care about and make the retrospective lead to actual action, because if they see the connection between the retrospective and something is improving in their lives, they will stop multitasking. It's the best way to fix it. Otherwise, it's just a hack, a layer on top of the actual fundamental problem, which is this meeting isn't giving me value. That's what we want to fix. So that's a good lead into the next topic here, which is follow-through, right? So how do we actually get all of this to matter? Rule 1. This is one of my favorite tips from this talk, is follow the energy. Here's what I mean. Any math people out there, you'll like this. The expected value of an action item, okay, is a function of, number 1, its impact. how much impact will it have? The effort that you have to put into making it happen. And finally, the odds you will actually do it. So let me give you an example. Imagine we're brainstorming in Decide What to Do, potential candidate actions we might take as a team to fix whatever the problem is we're discussing. And we list them out. Here are 5 of them represented by these yellow stickies. Okay. Now we set up a column called impact, and we ask people using t-shirt sizes, just roughly, how much impact will it have? Which one of these should we pick? If we were only looking at this data, it's pretty clear. It would be the last one, right? It's rated extra large. Let's fix a lot of things all at once, right? Okay, let's add effort to this. This is how much effort it's going to take. In this case, let's look through the data. It's still the last one, right? Extra large impact, extra small effort. This is a great candidate to work on. Many teams stop there, and then they fail. Why? Because the most important column, the last one, they didn't take into account, which is energy. In other words, how much energy do we as a team actually have to work on this? Because let's face it, if the team for some reason doesn't want to work on something, they likely won't. And if they don't work on it, the expected value of that action item is 0, regardless of its impact and effort. So in this case, once I filled in this entire diagram, I would actually pick the middle one, because the team seems really excited to work on that. And guess what? Having something that has a medium impact is a lot better than having something with no impact at all, the last one on the chart here. Yes? Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Energy. It's what is something that, if you were working on it right now, would give you energy as you worked on it. You know, things that you work on, that you do in your life, forget about work for a moment, that you do it and you're just in the flow and it just feels great and you could keep doing it and time passes. Ideally, that's the type of work we always want to be doing all the time. Now, I know that's not possible, so the question is, what of these actions would give you energy as you work on them? Now, if that's not something that is possible, none of them do, the next question might be, what excites you the most? Or which one of these would you actually care to work on? You can keep getting more specific. All of those prompts will help you. But energy to me is, which one is going to help you get energized in the upcoming sprint? I love this as a decide what to do facilitation technique. It really helps. Okay, rule 2, focus on one thing at a time. This is really simple. So many teams that I work with come up with 10 action items, and then of course nothing's going to get done because WIP is too high. If we focus on 10 things, nothing happens. Focus on one action item. Once your team gets good at actually working on one action item, maybe increase it to 2. But in my experience, 1 is just fine. Change is hard for all humans. I don't care who you are. Change is hard. Focus on one thing at a time and try to do it well. Yeah.
You say, it has to be smart, it has to be time bound, but once you figure out that it's a good thing, you continue, do you still count it as one action item? If you want to aim at to ingrain it into your team culture,
Yeah, so in other words, you write down an action item and then you work on it and you discover there's more to it than you initially thought. And so is this just one or many? It's a process, yeah. 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 So try to make bite-sized change instead of large change. We kind of understand this already about how we work on product. When we come up with the product increment that we're going to work on, we don't come up with some big, gigantic product increment. We try to break it down into its small component pieces that have, each of which have value. And so similarly with any process change, instead of trying to change the entire process all at once, see if you can find some small, bite-sized increment of the process that you can change that delivers value. Not always possible, but see if you can break it down. I'm going to keep going in the interest of time. We can come back to it at the end. Okay. Rule 3 is be smart. This is just the SMART acronym that we discussed before: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. There's actually different versions of this out there, which is why I got confused at the beginning. This is one of them. Here's some specific examples of how that actually translates into reality. Original action item on the left, experiment with continuous integration. How many people have written action items like that before? I know I have. Well, let's just do something, right? Okay, instead, the words in bold are the parts of this template that are repeatable, and then you fill in the parts that aren't bold. So in order to release our product on a more frequent basis, we will set up a continuous integration server before the end of the next sprint. That's the time-bound part. We will know that we were successful when commits to the code are automatically pushed to the continuous integration server. This is a much more specific action item, and most important, it's measurable. You know if you did it or not. unlike the first one, well, I experimented with continuous integration, but not enough. That's not what I thought was right. It's open to interpretation. All right, rule 4, small wins are better than no wins at all. This relates back to what I was saying a minute ago. A liberating structure, which is a set of facilitation techniques that I'm a big fan of, one of them is called 15% solutions. And the idea here is when you have something big that you're trying to work on, again, try to break it down into small bite-sized chunks. And the prompt here is, what is your 15%? Which becomes just a phrase that means, where do you have discretion and freedom to act right now without permission from anyone else in the organization? Even if you can't fix the big problem, what can you do with what's actually within your realm of control? What can you do without any more resources or authority? You can sum all of that up by what's your 15%. And some of the teams that I've worked with start to use that lingo when they're talking about something that feels hard or difficult or impossible or out of their control. Okay, let's bring it back into our circle of control. What can we do? All right, rule 5 is default to privacy and opt in to transparency. Anyone heard this before? What happens in Vegas doesn't always stay in Vegas, folks. They've got it wrong. It always gets out. And it's also true, but more in an intentional manner in retrospectives. So many teams that I've worked with have heard this before, and maybe some of you have also. What happens in a retro stays in a retro. Has anyone heard that? Yeah? I disagree with this, and I'll explain why. First, I want to empathize. It is absolutely important that psychological safety is protected on the team. I agree. However, if the team comes up with an issue that it can't solve on its own, and we have a rule of what happens in the retro stays in the retro, we are explicitly prevented from talking about it outside the team. So this rule I don't like. I like instead default to privacy, opt in to transparency. What I mean by that specifically and practically is, here's your prompt. At the end of the retro, you can ask your team the following. Is there anything we discussed today that we want to intentionally share with, pick who, the organization, your manager, the agile coach, whoever it is. And if the team opts in to saying yes to that, great, please share it, because otherwise we're just going to come back to the next retro and complain about the same thing again. If we don't speak up, it won't change. No one knows. Now, I can't promise it will change if you do speak up, but I can promise you it won't change if you don't. Okay. That leads me to an artifact, and this is my last kind of tip slide here before we close. An artifact you might want to consider producing in your retrospective at the end, which is called a retrospective radiator. In Agile, we like to use information radiators. Anyone heard of that before? The idea is big visualizations that radiate out information, okay? So things like a burn down chart. If you hang that in your team room, it's a big visualization and it radiates out information. Retrospectives are no different. What can we hang in our team room, whether physical or virtual, that radiates out information from our retrospective as a result of the prompt I just shared? Okay? So here are some categories you might choose. What did we learn today? Talk to us if. This is for other teams to come to you. Hypotheses and experiments we're working on. Action items that we're working on. Impediments that we're facing that we don't know how to solve. I made up these categories. You can pick whatever categories you'd like. Hang this in your team room. When someone else walks by, they'll get to see all of the things that you want to intentionally opt in to share transparently with your organization, just hanging there. Right? And now imagine if you work in a large enterprise and everybody did that. How much learning would there be simply by walking down the hall to the next meeting? This is what I mean by don't keep it private. Whatever's in the retro, share intentionally. Okay, to recap, the 5 rules. Follow the energy with action items. That's the best way to get them done. Focus on one thing at a time. That's also the best way to get something done. Be smart. That is also the best way to get things done. Small wins are better than no wins at all. I'll repeat it again. And finally, default to privacy and opt in to transparency. If you do all of that, it is likely that you will be able to get out of your disillusionment that we talked about at the beginning, where retros lead to lack of action, lead to bad retros, and so on. And instead, retrospectives lead to you feeling like you have a voice, that you can change things, and that leads to better retrospectives going forward and more engagement. I want to leave you with a prompt for you to think through. One thing I will try in my next retrospective is something that I talked to you about today. Because, again, if we just learn without action, we fall into that same trap. Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate your time, and I hope this helped you in your retrospectives. I'm happy to hang around and answer questions. It looks like I have about 6 minutes, so I'll stay up here for 6, and then you can come up after. Maybe you can pass the microphone around if people have questions. Oh yeah, okay. Good.
About oh, it's okay.
Yeah, it's fine. Either way.
I can project.
Right. Yeah, about the big grid you showed in the end. How can you reconciliate this with having one action point? Because I can see it exploding. For transparency, there's so much things we want to talk about.
Yeah. So think of it like a living artifact that doesn't necessarily relate to just one retrospective. It's whatever is relevant to the team right now, which may not be just the one retrospective we just ran, but rather the context of the quarter that we're working in, or the project or product we're working on. And as things become relevant, you put them up on the radiator, and when they become no longer relevant, you take them down. So if you're focusing on one thing at a time, go ahead and put it up there. However, there's another category, for example, things that we've learned. Well, you can record the things that we've learned that are still relevant to share with the rest of the organization over a quarter or more. And it becomes this living artifact of things that you want to share, as opposed to just the one thing we're working on in the retrospective right now. The idea is not so much to share what we're working on, although you can, as much as it is to share the things that other folks in the org might benefit from in some way, shape, or form.
So you can maintain it during the retro?
Yeah, it becomes kind of natural when you start using it. Just put things up, take things down whenever you think it's relevant. You're welcome. Yes?
So what would you do with action items that were not completed during last sprint or?
Yeah. So the question, well, I guess you heard because you have the microphone. So I don't have to do that anymore. What do you do with action items that aren't completed in the sprint? So the question is usually, do we continue to work on them or do we stop working on them? Guess what? It depends. It depends on context. One of the things that I like to do is bring that as data in the gather data phase of the retro the next time. The hard data, the indisputable fact is we did not complete this action item. Bring that to the retro and ask folks, do we want to keep talking about this or is it not relevant anymore? Simple way to let the team decide, give you input on what's most important. Yep. Yes. Oh, good. Hard questions. Okay.
I don't like my voice, so it's okay. Now, what happens to me is that we have great discussion. There's a lot of participation during the retro, but then when it comes down to making or preparing an action plan or action items, it's like nothing that we can do. It's everybody else's fault. We have done everything we could on our end, and there's like nothing that we could actually implement. But they love the exchange that we had. So I have a misconnection there. It's like the action plan doesn't reflect the discussion that we have. And at the same time, I understand sometimes it's hard to point it down to one thing or to put it down to one action. So what do you recommend in this situation?
Yeah, so there's a number of different reasons why there might be that disconnect between the amazing conversation that we had and the lack of ability to come up with an action item. One reason why that might happen is because the things we discussed about are things that we don't actually want to take responsibility for. We'd much rather blame someone else for. And the conversation is so engaging because it's easy to blame. And so we just talk about that other person or that other department and how bad they are, and we feel great because, oh, we got that off our chest. But now we get to actions and there's nothing to do about it.
We tried this, we tried that. We
Tried all the other things. Yep.
There's nothing else.
Yeah. So, okay, if you still have the problem and nothing is working, one thing I would recommend doing is split the team up into smaller groups, where a lot of times if we're as one big group and we're trying to come up with an action item, the person who's going to speak first is probably either the most senior person on the team or the most extroverted person on the team. And once an idea has been shared, you're going to be anchored to that idea. And only people with a strong sense of confidence and will are going to be able to shape the conversation in a different direction. So what you can do to overcome that problem is to break the team up into small groups of first just one, think to yourself, then pairs, and then bring it back to the broader group so that everybody has a chance to contribute. And it's possible you'll come up with all sorts of other actions that the team didn't know were possible that might give them new possibilities that they didn't see before. Now, if that doesn't work, the other suggestion that I've had for you is to focus on something different. If you keep trying things and it's not working, it's probably not your only problem that you're facing on your team. Refocus on something else. Come back to it in a month if it's still relevant. Sometimes that pause gets you out of that frustration zone and back into a realm of discovery and possibility. You're welcome. I have time for, I think, one more. Yes?
In certain organizations, we have time crunches for retros,
Yeah. So the question is, if there's time constraints, instead of an hour, maybe 45 minutes or even less possibly, what do I do? So my first question to you is, who is imposing that time constraint on you? Yeah. So it's management. When you say organization, it's management or executives are imposing that? Okay. So there's two aspects to this. One is those folks need some coaching. Okay, that's number one, because the reality is we live in a complex world. I'm not the first person to say this by any means. It's not an original thought. But we live in a complex world, and the only way to overcome complexity is by learning as we go. So they need some coaching. So that's the first thing. But putting that aside, the other thing you can do is to do stealth retrospectives. Okay? So I don't mean to try to go behind their back. I don't mean that at all. What I mean is there is the type of retrospective that takes an hour and is run every week or every 2 weeks. There's also the type of retrospective that is run much more frequently and is much shorter in length. For example, at the end of every day, hey folks, let's just check in for 10 minutes. No one's gonna know, and it's fine. How's it going? And you can really quickly go through the 5 stages, still use them. You can do it in 10 minutes, actually. And as you build up muscle memory on doing this every day very quickly, you'll start to see the benefit of them, I hope, in which case, hopefully, management will start to see why this is important. So run shorter ones that aren't labeled the retrospective, and sometimes you can start to get that learning even without the full hour. I think I'm out of time. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.